well-regulated militia be necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Thank you for tuning in to another edition of Bearing Arms, Cam and Company. My name is Cam Edwards. Great to have you with us once again on the program. Coming up in mere moments, going to be talking with my friend Kerry Picket from the Washington Examiner. You may also hear Kerry on occasion on Sirius XM Patriot, filling in for folks like David Webb, Andrew Wilkow. And Kerry has been covering the 2020 presidential election, but she's also been covering what's happening in the state of Virginia, where we are located. Farmville, Virginia is, of course, where we do our program each and every day. And it is just down the road about an hour or so, the state capital of Richmond. That's where all eyes are going to be starting on Wednesday. That is when the 2020 legislative session begins. And gun control is expected to be among the first issues addressed by the new Democratic majority. So I wanted to talk with Kerry to get her perspective and her thoughts on what she's been hearing in the state of Virginia, what bills are right now on the front burner, and what bills, by the way, we may be seeing some lawmakers start to have second thoughts about. Take a look and a listen. Kerry, it is so good talking with you. Thanks for joining me today.
Hey, thanks for having me, Cam.
You bet. So we are now, I think, in the thick of it in Virginia. Legislative session kicks off on Wednesday, and it looks like, really out of the gate, lawmakers are going to be going after the Second Amendment rights of Virginians.
Absolutely. And I think that as we get closer to the legislative session, we are going to see not just a lot of these new political activists who have all of a sudden realized here in Virginia that their gun rights are going to be threatened, but we're going to see a number of these legislators on the Democrat side start to maybe rethink as to what type of situation that they're in. So that's something to definitely watch for, Cam.
Absolutely. And it's interesting. I mean, you've got what appears on paper to be a pretty comfortable 10-vote majority in the House of Delegates for Democrats, and that doesn't necessarily translate to anti-gun votes. Over on the Senate side, it's a lot closer. It's 21-19 Democrats over Republicans, and we are already seeing some Democrat politicians, particularly in rural parts of the state, come out and say things like, listen, I'm not going to vote for anything that's going to take people's guns away.
Exactly. And this is where we start looking at situations where they go, okay, we have the situation with SB 16. Of course, that is the situation with what they like to call the assault, quote unquote, the assault weapons bill, as just shorthand there, quote unquote. And they say, well, maybe we don't want to take your guns away, but we'll start going into the bill itself and see what we can carve out, see what exemptions we can deal with. Maybe we don't want it at all, and that's where their constituents need to sort of step up and start putting pressure on them if they don't want this bill at all. Because once again, they only need 2 Democrats to end up defecting, and that could be something that is very interesting going down the road here.
Absolutely. If they're able to keep every Republican on board, which is, another question. Senator Tommy Norman, Republican from Virginia Beach, actually told he was at a luncheon on Friday, and he said he expects that background checks, for example, he said he expects that that's going to pass with some Republican votes. I got to tell you, Kerry, I mean, I've been to a lot of these Second Amendment sanctuary county meetings where you've had folks from the local GOP who are registering people to vote. They're signing up. They're getting their names. They're doing a really good job of tapping into this new grassroots movement. But I feel like if you see a number of Republicans start backing some of these gun control proposals, all of that grassroots outreach by the GOP is going to be for naught, because they've got to give gun owners and Second Amendment supporters a reason to go out and support them.
Kim, here is what I'm thinking about, is that let's say you have a number, or rather just say two or so Democrats who say, okay, guess what? We are not going to support SB 16, the big bad one, and we will hold that off, okay, and then everyone goes, yay, let's do a big happy dance, the big bad wolf is defeated. But then they go, but but we're going to pass red flag laws. We're going to pass universal background checks. And everyone kind of forgets that, those aren't that great either.
Mm-hmm.
But still, everyone's like, but you're not taking our guns, woo! And then what ends up happening, though, is that while this goes on, the Democrats are looking at the census. The Democrats are looking at redistricting, and they begin to solidify their majority even more. So then a couple of years later, it becomes even harder. They go, oh, guess what? We're coming for your guns.
Right.
And it's going to be nearly impossible to even overcome that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, unfortunately, look, you can look at New Jersey, you can look at California, you can look at Maryland or Massachusetts. When a legislature flips to an anti-gun majority, it's never one and done. Right? They never pass everything they want and then say, all right, we've accomplished our agenda. They go back year after year and enact further restrictions. And I think that is absolutely what we will see here in Virginia. You're right. I'm not convinced. I think the scenario that you just laid out is actually a really viable scenario where horse trading gets done, where the most egregious anti-gun bills, the gun bans, the magazine bans, perhaps those get put on the back burner. But no way would you ever see, by the way, Ralph Northam, even if a bill doesn't get to his desk, no way would he say, oh, this is a bad idea. We don't support these magazine bans. This is what they're in favor of. This is what they want. And if they get it all in 2020 or they have to wait till 2021 or redistricting, further on in the decade, you're right. This is the tip of the iceberg. And that's why I think it's so important that we see this grassroots reaction. And we see it channeled into the most productive avenues possible. And right now, frankly, that is, staying in constant contact with your local lawmakers and letting them know how you feel about these things.
Sure thing. And this is one of those situations where very often when people think, oh, we stopped it, that's it, as you just put one and done, and people think that they can just go home and they can enjoy their firearms, and that's the end of that. That's the Achilles heel, and one of the things that they have to remember, especially with lawmakers who think, okay, well, we're not going to keep in touch. We're just going to move along now. Everything it ends up being death by 1,000 cuts.
Yep.
So. One of the things, too, that I think that is very important is also not to put out, or rather, whether put out, but also believe, shall I say, information that is just not credible. I think we've seen a lot of that, Cam. I know that you have seen a whole lot of that as well, whether it has to do with, the UN is coming
right.
to take your guns.
Ralph Northam's going to shut off the power, and even confusion. I think about some of the bills that have been introduced. One in particular, I think was House Bill 67, introduced by Lee Carter, who's a socialist who got elected, I think, for the first time last year, and it's being portrayed as if police don't enforce these new gun laws, then they can be fired for that. And in actuality, it allows for public employees, every public employee except for law enforcement, to strike in the state of Virginia. So it actually has nothing to do with any of the gun control bills. It's a bill that I don't support because I don't support public employees striking. But again, it's being portrayed as something that it is not. And you're right. There's a lot of misinformation going around. I think there's because there is so much concern on the part of gun owners. And because I think of the lack of information that we've actually heard from Governor Northam, who's been, pretty mum about everything, except for, I expect Second Amendment sanctuaries to follow the law. I think that it becomes easy for gun owners to, see some of this misinformation and think, well, that sounds true, right? That sounds plausible. We've based on some of the comments, for instance, by Representative Donna McEachin to call out the National Guard. I think there have been a lot of unhelpful things said on both sides in terms of, helping to, calm the situation, to calm the waters, but also in terms of, again, letting Virginians actually know what is coming. That's been one of the most frustrating things about this is, the governor playing things so close to the vest tells me it's about politics. It's not about public safety.
That is such a great point, Cam, that very often when it comes to a number of these lawmakers who say, well, we are going to end up banning this type of firearm, they never, ever, ever tell us how they're going to enforce it, because ultimately they know that the enforcement measures are usually pie in the sky because they have seen how those enforcement measures have often worked out over in Connecticut, over in New York,
mm-hmm.
and how often the compliance has been so incredibly low. So you often back them up into a corner. I mean, even with the candidates over in the 2020 presidential campaign, anytime reporters, including myself, have asked a number of these candidates, well, how are you going to enforce it? It's usually homina, homina, homina. And and that's why, you have someone like Northam, as you just said, when they play it so close to the vest, well, what's going to happen? People are going to say, well, what are you going to do? Have the stormtroopers come in and just kick down my door to take my AR-15 or AK-47 or anything similar to that?
Right. Yeah, a perfect case in point. We've seen the governor's budget calls for 10 new positions with the Virginia State Police to enforce universal background checks, red flag laws. Now, you can imagine a lot of that's going to be dealing with, the background check requests. We're not talking about troopers who are actually going to be, patrolling to enforce those laws. But the governor's budget also calls for 18 Virginia State Police positions to enforce the quote-unquote assaultments ban. What's that all about? I mean, again, 18 people sounds like a really small number to go door to door and confiscate firearms. But at the same time, given what we know about the lack of enforceability of these types of laws, what exactly would those 18 positions be doing? Governor Northam hasn't said, which leads people to the conclusion of, gee, well, maybe they're supposed to go take our guns, since the provisions of Senate Bill 16 right now, as written, do not allow people to continue to possess the guns that they currently legally own. So, I want to ask you, though, because you brought up the 2020 presidential election. So we just learned from the FBI today that 2019 record number of NICS checks performed, nearly 29 million NICS checks as we head into a presidential election year. We've also seen, going back to 2008 presidential election years, have typically seen a spike or an increase in the number of NICS checks performed. As you've been out following the candidates, and you've been, you're a lot more mobile than I am right now in Farmville, Virginia. I'm curious to get your sense of how engaged gun owners are around the country as we head into the 2020 election year. How many gun owners outside of the state of Virginia are paying attention to what's happening here and understand that it could happen to them if they are complacent and if they are not engaged in this election year? Where are we right now nationwide in terms of Second Amendment awareness and activism?
I think that essentially legal gun owners, are extraordinarily engaged, Cam. I mean, think about this. Going back to 2008, you saw this sprout up over in Illinois, the very first sanctuary county there. Mm-hmm. They knew what was going on and how it spread all over the country, over in Oregon, over in Washington State. And now, most recently, we ended up seeing Mike Bloomberg himself get asked about the church shooting over in Texas, and he completely showed his foot, saying, "Well, I don't think the average citizen should have a gun in a crowded place." And it's like, why don't you just say that the Second Amendment should just be repealed, Mike Bloomberg?
It would be a much more honest approach. You're right. Yeah, I advocated for Beta War Work to do that too. I thought it would have been a much more honest thing to say, rather than those 18 million concealed carry holders. We want to take your rights away from you. It's absolutely unbelievable. But you do believe that that gun owners are aware, that they are engaged, and to that end, then do you think that 2020 is going to be a critical year for our Second Amendment?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Especially now, since Virginia, even though it came in a little later after these other states that had already had a number of these sanctuary Second Amendment counties it made the issue national. And now these candidates have to answer for it. I mean, they have talked about, quote unquote, as we like to hear them say, sensible, gun laws, whatever the case that means as far as their definition of it. But now they have to answer for it because they see it on their TVs, on the radio, and they are going to have to answer questions for it because one of the things specifically that the Democrats are so upset about, specifically with that Texas church shooting, isn't just that it happened, because they always hear about defensive stories or rather defensive gun use happening. It's the fact that it happened on video, the fact that people saw it, with their own eyes. We always see it, written up, and it's very easy for them to ignore it and go like, yeah, whatever. But the fact that it was live streamed, and people actually saw all the actions of this former FBI guy, stop the guy, they couldn't stop that video from getting out all over the place, and that's what bugs them the most. So they have to answer for that.
Kerry Picket with the Washington Examiner. Listen, I appreciate you spending some time with us today. Thank you so much, and I hope we get a chance to do this again soon.
You got it, Cam.
All right, we'll talk to you soon. Kerry Picket with us here on Bearing Arms, Cam and Company. All right, we are going to be paying a lot of attention to Virginia. I there's a part of me that wants to apologize for folks who are not Virginians, that I don't want you to think that this is localism at work here, but it's not. It just so happens that I live in the state that is right now ground zero for anti-gun efforts. And my hope is that by covering what happens in Virginia, we can ignore this happening in any other state in 2020, because gun control advocates want to take the Virginia game plan and they want to bring it, I swear, sounds crazy, they want to bring it to places like Texas, where they really do believe that with an influx of cash and the network that Michael Bloomberg has helped build with Moms Demand Action, Every Time for Gun Safety, that they can flip Texas and turn the Texas legislature into an anti-gun body. They want to make inroads in Florida. They want to do the same in Ohio. They are pushing wherever they can. Sometimes in states where, again, it looks like the odds will be against them, that doesn't matter. They really do believe that this is going to be the year that Americans turn out and embrace a gun control agenda nationwide. And gun owners, we have got to be engaged, as I said, from now through Election Day and beyond, in constant contact with both candidates and our lawmakers. Be polite, be civil, but let them know where you stand, particularly on these bills that are coming in Virginia and around the country. Now, the good news is that there are a lot of gun owners in this country, and we do seem to be politically engaged. As Kerry Picket noted, she's certainly seeing that on the campaign trail. But the FBI reporting that 2019, a record-breaking year for the number of NICS checks performed. Yeah, nearly, as I mentioned to Kerry, nearly 29 million NICS checks performed. Now, this is not a perfect proxy for gun sales, because if somebody buys more than one firearm, it's only going to be one NICS check performed. And there are some checks that are done for things like concealed carry applications or renewals. But what this does show, and this is a 3% increase over the previous record, which was set in 2016. What this shows, I do believe, is that American gun owners are engaged. And in fact, I do believe we're seeing new Americans become gun owners who are also engaged. But I want those new gun owners to understand that your activism doesn't end at the checkout counter. That's when your activism begins. And while you are now a gun owner and you're exercising your Second Amendment rights, you need to be politically active to protect those rights, or they will disappear faster than you might think. But again, it is great news. I do suspect that we will see the number of background checks in 2020 increase and surpass 30 million. Virginia might be a big reason because gun sales are through the roof right now in the state of Virginia. But I suspect this is going to be another record-breaking year in terms of Americans purchasing firearms, getting their background checks for concealed carry licenses, and really, again, exercising their right to keep and bear arms. All right, let's get to today's Armed Citizen story, our good deed of the day. And Man, this might be our most disturbing recidivist report that I have run across yet. I do have to tell you, this is pretty awful stuff here. Even the headline is pretty awful. Floyd County, Kentucky man arrested for skinning dogs to make a doggy coat. Yeah, and as it turns out, this guy, well known to authorities, because they have dealt with him before. 38-year-old Jonathan Watkins is his name. He is accused of killing his neighbor's dogs and skinning them. It was December 23rd, according to WTVQ, when state troopers responded to a call out of Floyd County. Caller told him that his neighbor had killed his two dogs, skinned them, and had these skins and carcasses hanging off of his front porch. Yeah. Kentucky State Police Post 9 Public Affairs Officer Trooper William Petrie said apparently made a statement he was making a fur coat out of the dog's hides. Neighbor Joshua Vick told troopers he later saw 4 animal skins on Watkins' front porch along with 2 skinned dog carcasses. He notified troopers that one of the other neighbor's 2 dogs was missing. State Police said Watkins admitted in graphic detail to killing his neighbor's dog, saying he stabbed them in the heart and threw the carcasses over the hill when he was done skinning them. Trooper Petrie with the Kentucky State Police says, quote, he does have a criminal history here in Floyd County for several things. WTVQ said the guy's rap sheet is 5 pages long. And it charges ranging from assault to murder of a police officer. His stepfather, Albert Bloomfield, who was a deputy jailer in Magoffin County. WTVQ says that 2013 case was eventually dismissed after a psychiatric evaluation found him not responsible. In other words, they because he was insane. So he was too insane to be tried. He was too insane to go to prison, but apparently he was not too insane to be put back out on the streets there in Floyd, Kentucky. Now he's being held without bond, pending a psychiatric evaluation. I hate to prejudge this case, but I imagine what they're going to find here. And again, Watkins' case scheduled to be reviewed January 24th. This guy never should have been out on the streets to begin with, but he was. And there is your recidivist report. All right, on to our armed citizen story of the day from from Indianapolis, Indiana, not Albuquerque, New Mexico. The Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department reporting that a man was shot while attempting to rob a driver at a gas station. Yeah, a 20-year-old man is in critical condition at last report after police say he attempted to rob somebody and the victim shot him. This happened Friday night about 9:30. Police were called out on reports of shots fired. When they arrived, they found a 20-year-old man with an injury consistent with a gunshot wound. Emergency medics took the man to an area hospital in critical condition. WISH-TV says detectives at the scene learned that the man who was shot had approached a vehicle at the gas station and attempted to rob the driver, who then shot the robbery suspect. Person in that car remained on scene, cooperated with police, and apparently acted in self-defense. We'll try to keep our eyes on any more details coming out of that self-defense story in Indianapolis. And finally, our good deed of the day from Fort Smith, Arkansas, where the Fort Smith Police Department named their officer, field training officer, Kenneth Martin, their employee of the month for January because of what Officer Martin did with a family that was caught shoplifting there in Fort Smith. This Arkansas officer ended up, he was one of 2 officers, according to KFSM, called to a Walmart in Fort Smith due to a family of shoplifters. Husband, wife, their young children have been caught trying to steal food. The man was arrested. Martin released the mom to take her children home. And then he said, and this was caught on his body camera, by the way, he said, they're stealing food and they've got kids. He said, I have to take them to jail. He said, I have to take him to jail. But I don't have to make the kids think I'm a And so he then approaches the mom and the children, and he says, I took care of these for you, okay? He said, I understand this is food and things that you need, but ask for some help. Don't do this to these babies. So he paid for the groceries that they were shoplifting. Fort Smith Police Department praised Officer Martin's dedication and work in that Facebook post, as I imagine most folks would. So in the right place, at the right time, willing and able to do the right thing, Field Training Officer Kenneth Martin there in Fort Smith, Arkansas, we thank you for your good deed. That is going to do it for this edition of Bearing Arms Cam and Company. I want to thank you. You're looking at the right camera there. I want to thank you for joining me on the program today. This is, as I said, going to be a very busy week with the start not only of the legislative session in Virginia, but other legislatures kicking off around the country as well. Make sure that you are following everything at BearingArms.com. You can also subscribe to Bearing Arms Cam and Company at Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, that's the big one, townhall.com's podcast page. And you can become a VIP member of Bearing Arms at BearingArms.com and get exclusive commentary, analysis, stories, and more. We do appreciate your support. Thank you for watching, for listening, for spreading the word. And we'll be back tomorrow with another brand new edition of Bearing Arms Cam and Company.